My pastor once officiated a wedding. He had done all the premarital counseling for the couple. They seemed good to go and fine. Got to the altar, he did his opening prayer and welcome. He gets to the part when he says, "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" And the guy looked at her, back at him and said, "No." Pastor laughed a little and repeated the question thinking he misunderstood. But the guy stopped him and said, "No, I don't." He took the groom aside to a back room, where the guy essentially said that he couldn't do it, that the bride and her mother had manipulated the whole wedding and he had been too chicken to stand up to her before, but that he couldn't throw his life away. They brought in both families and had a very real conversation. And then the pastor had to go back out and explain to the very uncomfortable congregation that there would be no wedding today, that the guests could help themselves to some refreshments, but that the rest of the evening's events were cancelled. My wife's friend ran during Mass. We sat there shocked, not knowing what to do or say. Do we just leave? What is the etiquette? Is there even etiquette to follow? She came back after about 10 minutes, after she and her mom got her wedding gown off and on again. Turns out, after drinking greasy food and nerves, she was experiencing severe GI distress and didn't want to chance it. Years later, we still laugh. At the time, it was one of the most awkward things to sit through. Edited. Yes, still happily married. She did tell the groom, but the rest of us had no idea until the reception. The bride is pretty blunt, and that's how we know what really happened. I posted this in another thread about the most embarrassing thing you ever saw happen to a teacher. My entire 4th grade class was in attendance at our teacher's wedding where she was left at the altar. The whole situation was ugly. My teacher was the bride and was about 3/4 down the aisle when the groom decided he couldn't do it. He walked off to the side, and at first my teacher and her father didn't notice and kept walking, smiling radiantly. There was about a minute of really solid confusion, last-minute cold feet, bathroom emergency, closing parenthesis, before everyone realized what was going on. My teacher was whisked out of the church and an announcement was made that there was not going to be a wedding. This happened the 2nd or 3rd week of June. She didn't come back for the last week of school. This actually happened to me. The guy the first was supposed to marry just didn't show up at all. He called all of his friends and family on his side and told them not to bother showing up because he wouldn't be there. We waited around till about an hour after the wedding started, and finally got a text message saying he wasn't coming. So I got to look like a jerk by telling my family, "Oh, sorry, there won't be a wedding today." It was mortifying. And to top things off, my son was asking me why his daddy didn't want to marry mommy. Very hard to explain that to a 2-year-old. Sad face. Edit. Thanks for the super awesome support and just the overall chatting. You guys are awesome. Edit 2. Thanks for the gold. X2 less than 3. Yes. My friend's groom-to-be left her at the altar. He took the tickets to Hawaii for their honeymoon and instead went with his brother. She spent a year dating around before he begged her to take him back, saying that he was wrong. He, a very well-off young lawyer, bought her a huge rock and paid for a lavish wedding, and she agreed. They were married soon after and now have a baby daughter. Holy duck, yes, a thread where I have a good story. Buddy of mine was engaged to this girl who no one liked. She pretty much had him on a leash. He also had to carry around a man purse full of her stuff. Anyways, they were getting married and we all were too polite to tell him what we really thought about her. Morning of the wedding, his grandmother, who had literally just met his fiance, told him, and I, stuff, you not, this is a direct quote, I always figured you'd marry ya. See you next Tuesday. Quote. Got about halfway through the wedding ceremony, and then he just booked it. Didn't say anything, just walked off the altar and left, mid-wedding. He did end up marrying her though, but it was months later. Edit. A lot of people are wondering why I never told him how I felt. And honestly it's because she wasn't a bad person. She was just controlling. And he was a doormat. But it's not like she cheated on him. Or was only with him for his money. Since I was never asked, I never volunteered my opinion. I was at the wedding for one of my sister's friends who was the bride. The bride never showed up at the wedding and no one could find her. After several hours the groom and his family all went home. Turned out the bride went for a wild night of partying and slept with some guy she met at a club. She was passed out drunk at his place all day long before she came around and realized she missed her own wedding. She was out with a friend that did nothing to stop her from getting wasted and screwing around. I think her friend let her get carried away because she thought the bride wouldn't have been a good wife and figured it was the easiest way to get the couple to split up. The father of the bride was mad as hell about the expense of the wedding that came out of his pocket. The groom has since moved on with his own life. Discovering the woman he was going to marry had cheated on him the night before their wedding made him break it off. He hasn't gotten married, but I hear he's dating someone and it looks serious enough they may get married soon. The bride has been having problems trying to get the respect of her family back after that stunt. She once tried to talk to me when I was single to see if we could go out. I told her flat out I had no interest in dating a woman who cheats like she does. We've not spoken since, much to my relief. It happened to my sister. He lost his bottle and didn't show. He was a turd anyway. I, as one of her 3 brothers, joined the other 2 on a bit of a manhunt, but we didn't find him. He was apparently already out of town. My sister didn't really react at first, but my father, several thousand out of pocket, wasn't so quiet. The groom's family, friends and relatives all apologetically and sheepishly melted away as our lot went on for the meal and a drink. Our father ended up being arrested for basically threatening to wipe out his family over the whole thing a few weeks later, and my sister held her head up throughout, came out with her dignity and carried on. If you're out there, Tim, we still haven't forgotten what a cowardly stuff you are. Not exactly what Op asked for, but it is an amazing image, so I'll throw in with it. The bride and groom apparently had discussed the smashing the piece of wedding cake in each other's face. They had decided they would not do it. They cut the cake. She takes the piece and smashes it into his face and loudly announces, and there is nothing he can do about it. Quote, he lifted the entire cake and dropped it on her head. The marriage only lasted a few years. Long time ago I went to my father's wedding. It would have been his 4th. They got to the altar and mutually decided to call it off. We still had the reception as there was no reason to waste all the booze and food. They stayed together as a couple another month or 2. It's sad I don't even remember her name. Then again, out of the 5 marriages my father had, only 2 of them lasted more than 3 years. My dad went to a society wedding in the 90s in the UK. The ceremony went ahead without incident and they had got to the speeches. The groom stood up, said, "I'd like to thank my beautiful wife and my brilliant best man, as they've been ducking each other for the past 6 months. Cheers." Quote, he downed his drink and walked out on the back to stunned silence. Apparently the father of the bride went around putting the corks back in the bottles shouting, "Party's over. Everyone out." He seemed to think he could get money back in the booze. Late to the party. This was sometime in the 70s. My uncle in India was attending the wedding of some not-so-close friends. Totally common to have 1,000 people at a wedding with many people that barely know the couple in attendance. The bride was left at the altar and literally standing on the stage and waiting while everyone was watching. My uncle stepped up and said he'd marry her. He must have felt some sudden rush of Bollywood go throughout him this year. Anyway, she said yes and they are happily married to this day. Edit. Story below. I attended a wedding where the bride was left at the altar. Man, it was sad and odd. There was a pretty large audience. Soon enough the time to start comes and goes. Everyone in the audience is sitting there waiting at least 30 to 60 minutes after the ceremony was supposed to begin, all with no official word from the wedding party or why there was such a long delay. Rumors started going around. People were saying that one of the groomsmen stained his shirt, and a bunch of other stuff that indicated nothing serious. Finally, the bride's father, tears in his eyes, gets up on stage to announce that the groom has had a change of heart. Part 2. Needless to say, it was pretty shocking. But he told everyone to go on ahead to the reception and eat full dinner, because the food had already been paid for, so someone might as well enjoy it. I couldn't believe it, but the bride actually showed up at the reception and greeted everyone with a smile. No less. The groom did not make an appearance. The bride got married a few years later to a guy with the same first name. Oddly, but the groom is still single to this day. Apparently, he was never truly ready to get married, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything until the pressure finally got to him on the big day. He got a lot of flack from friends and strangers who didn't even know them, naturally, but the two of them ended up agreeing that since he wasn't ready, then it was a good thing that he did not commit, though he definitely regrets the way he led her on. The strangest part of the whole day? The wedding was on April 1st.